Disaster. She clutched a manila folder, thick with photographs, her face flushed with the satisfaction of someone who had just caught a criminal red-handed. The receptionist, a young woman named Emily, looked up from her computer with barely concealed dread. I need to file an official complaint immediately, Brenda announced with a triumphant tone, slapping the folder onto the counter. I have documented evidence of a man illegally tagging fish in our lake, animal cruelty, poaching, and probably drug trafficking to you never know. With these types, Emily's fingers paused over her keyboard. Mrs. Holloway, which lake are you referring to? Silver Pine Lake. Obviously the one that borders our community. I saw him out there this morning in some rickety boat grabbing fish and putting tags on them like they're luggage at an airport. It's disgusting. The receptionist's face went pale. She glanced at her computer screen, then back at Brenda. Mrs. Holloway, I think there might be a misunderstanding. The man you're describing, does he happen to be about 6 feet tall, brown hair, drives a green truck? Yes, you know him. Good, that'll make the arrest easier. Emily cleared her throat nervously. That would be Mr. David Brennan. He owns Silver Pine Lake. Brenda's triumphant expression faltered for just a moment before hardening again. Nonsense, that lake belongs to the HOA. We've been using it for 20 years. Actually, Emily said quietly, pulling up a document on her screen. Mr. Brennan inherited the lake from his grandfather 3 months ago, and she paused, her voice dropping even lower. He also owns this building, the one we're standing in right now. I had moved to Silver Pine 3 months earlier, inheriting not just my grandfather's modest cabin, but also several parcels of land he had quietly accumulated over decades. The cabin sat on the eastern shore of the lake, a weathered structure that had sheltered 3 generations of Brennan men. My grandfather had been a conservationist before the term was trendy, working with universities to track fish populations and monitor ecosystem health. The lake itself was pristine, fed by mountain springs and home to several species of native trout. Every morning, I would take his old aluminum boat out onto the water, continuing the tagging project he had started in 1970. The work was methodical and peaceful. Catch, measure, tag, release. Each fish got a small harmless tag that would help track migration patterns and population health. I had noticed the sprawling subdivision on the western shore of Course Riverside Estates, with its identical McMansions and manicured lawns that ran right up to the water's edge, but they had kept to their side, and I had kept to mine, at least until that morning when a woman in a velour tracksuit had appeared on the shore, shouting at me through a megaphone she apparently kept handy for such occasions. You there, stop what you're doing immediately. You are in violation of HOA Ordinance 7.3 subsection B. I had looked up from the rainbow trout I was carefully measuring, squinting against the morning sun. The woman stood on the shore like a general surveying a battlefield, her free hand on her hip. Good morning, I called back politely. I'm conducting authorized research. Would you like to see my permits? She laughed, a sharp sound that echoed across the water. Permits? You think permits give you the right to torture animals in HOA waters? I'm reporting you to everyone, the police, wildlife services, the news. We'll see how long your little permits last when Channel 7 gets wind of this animal abuse. I had tried to explain that fish tagging was a standard conservation practice, that the tags caused no permanent harm, that I had partnerships with 3 universities, but she was already storming away, her phone pressed to her, no doubt calling the first of many authorities. True to her word, Brenda launched a full-scale campaign against me. She filed complaints with the Department of Natural Resources, claiming I was poaching. She called the EPA, insisting I was polluting the lake with foreign objects. She even convinced a reporter from the local news to come out, though the young journalist seemed more interested in the actual conservation work than Brenda's accusations of aquatic terrorism. The HOA board meetings, I learned it from Emily during one of my visits to pay the office lease, had become Brenda's personal platform. She distributed photos of me manhandling innocent fish, created PowerPoint presentations about the dangers of unauthorized lake use, and proposed increasingly absurd measures to protect what she kept calling our lake. She wants to install security cameras around the entire perimeter, Emily told me one afternoon, shaking her head, and hire a lake patrol. She's got half the board convinced you're running some kind of illegal fishing ring. I continued my work documenting each interaction with Brenda in case I needed it later. She would appear on the shore at random times, sometimes with other residents she had recruited to her cause. They would shout accusations, take pictures, and occasionally call 911 to report suspicious activity. The police, who knew my family and understood the research, would show up, check my permits, and leave with apologetic shrugs. The turning point came on a Thursday morning in June. I was out on the lake earlier than usual, hoping to avoid Brenda's morning patrol, when 3 official vehicles pulled up to the boat launch. 2 officers from the Department of Natural Resources, a representative from the EPA, and a federal wildlife agent stepped out, looking serious. Mr. Brennan, the wildlife agent called out, we need to speak with you about some complaints. I guided the boat back to shore, my grandfather's old tackle box full of tagging equipment beside me. Brenda appeared within minutes, as if summoned by the presence of authority. She stood behind the officials, arms crossed, wearing what could only be described as a victorious smirk. Finally, she announced to the small crowd of residents that had gathered, this menace will be stopped. I hope you all appreciate what your HOA president has done to protect our community. The wildlife agent, a no-nonsense woman named Agent Martinez, opened her notebook. Mr. Brennan, we've received multiple complaints about unauthorized tagging of fish in this lake. We need to see your documentation. Of course, I said calmly, reaching into my waterproof document box. I have my scientific collection permit from the state, my federal marking authorization, and partnership agreements with the University of Colorado State University and Pacific Northwest Research Institute. I handed over the papers, all properly laminated and organized. Agent Martinez examined them carefully while Brenda's smirk began to fade. These all appear to be in order, the agent said. In fact, this is one of the most comprehensive conservation programs I've seen from a private researcher. How long has this project been running? My grandfather started it in 1972. We have 52 years of continuous data on the fish populations in Silver Pine Lake. The EPA representative looked impressed. 52 years, that's invaluable for tracking environmental changes. Do you share this data? Quarterly reports go to all 3 partner universities and the state wildlife department. We've contributed to 16 published studies on freshwater ecosystem health. Agent Martinez turned to Brenda. Ma'am, not only is Mr. Brennan's work completely legal, it's federally protected. Research interfering with it could actually result in charges against you. But he's touching fish without how permission. Brenda sputtered. That's when I played my first card. Actually, I should clarify something. This is my lake. I own it outright, including the deed to all water and fishing rights. The DNR officer looked up from the permits. You own the lake. My grandfather purchased it in 1968. I inherited it 3 months ago, along with several other properties. I pulled out another document. Here's the deed. Brenda's face went from red to white. That's impossible. The HOA has been using this lake for 20 years. We have boat parades, fishing tournaments, which I've graciously allowed to continue. I said mildly, though I'm starting to reconsider given the harassment I've endured while conducting federally protected research. You can't. Brenda stammered. There's one more thing, I added, unable to resist. I also own the building where the HOA offices are located, the Riverside Professional Plaza. My grandfather bought it as an investment in 1995. You've been my tenants for 15 years. The silence that followed was beautiful. Even the morning birds seemed to pause their singing to appreciate the moment. Agent Martinez closed her notebook with a snap that made Brenda flinch. Mr. Brennan, I apologize for the inconvenience. Your work here is clearly legitimate and valuable. In fact, I'd like to recommend your lake for inclusion in our national freshwater monitoring network. I'd be honored, I replied. The officials began to leave, but Agent Martinez turned back. Oh, and ma'am, she addressed Brenda, filing false reports with federal agencies is a serious matter. I'll be noting this incident in my report. After the officials left, I sent a formal letter to the HOA board. It was polite but firm. First, I informed them that their lease would be increasing by 30% at the next renewal date, which was just 2 months away. Market rates, I explained, had risen considerably since their last negotiation with my grandfather. Second, due to repeated violations of the federal wildlife Protection Act by their president I was revoking all HOA access to Silver Pine Lake effective immediately. The letter detailed how Brenda's harassment had interfered with protected research and created liability issues I could no longer ignore. Third, I was filing a formal complaint with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the interference, which could result in fines up to $25,000 per violation given that Brenda had interfered with my work on 47 documented occasions. The potential penalties were substantial. The emergency HOA meeting was held that evening. Emily later told me it was the most attended meeting in the association's history. Brenda stood at the podium trying to spin the situation as a misunderstanding, but the board members had already read my letter. They had also discovered that Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for the private investigator she'd hired to follow me without board approval. You told us the lake belonged to the community, one board member said angrily. You've been sending threatening letters to our landlord. I was protecting our interests, Brenda protested with a desperate tone. You were harassing a man on his own property, another member corrected, and now we're losing lake access and facing a 30% rent increase because of your vendetta. The vote to remove her as president was unanimous except for her own vote, but the consequences didn't stop there. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, after reviewing my documentation and video evidence from my boat's camera, issued Brenda a fine of $75,000 for repeated interference with protected wildlife research. When the registered letter arrived at her house delivered by a postal worker who required a signature, Brenda's shriek could be heard 3 blocks away. $75,000, she screamed from her doorway, the letter crumpling in her shaking hands.